Have you ever felt that sudden heat when someone crosses a line? A comment cuts too deep, a promise breaks, a boundary is ignored, and your whole body reacts before your mind can make sense of it. This cluster explores those charged moments, the ones that ignite our defenses, sharpen our judgments, and awaken the instinct to protect what feels sacred. These are the emotions that surface when we feel wronged: the fire, the recoil, the tightening, the instinct to push back or pull away.
Welcome to the Heart's Compass, a journey through the landscapes of human emotion.
When we feel wronged, our emotions rise quickly, shaped by our values, our boundaries, and the deep human need to be treated with dignity. This cluster explores the feelings that surface when harm is done, fairness is broken, or respect is withheld. Anger, the fire that rises when a boundary is crossed, signaling that something we value has been threatened. Contempt, the emotional distancing that elevates us above another, creating separation where connection once lived. Disgust, the visceral recoil that pushes us away from what feels morally or emotionally contaminated. Dehumanization, the flattening of another's complexity, reducing them to an idea, an offense, or a single harmful act. Hate, the intense, consuming force that seeks to reject, punish, or erase what feels dangerous or deeply unjust. Self-righteousness, the moral certainty that our perspective is the only correct one, leaving little room for nuance, humility, or shared humanity. Here, emotion is not just reaction, it's protection. These experiences reveal how we defend ourselves, how we interpret harm, and how we navigate the tension between justice and judgment.
Anger. Anger arrives like heat, sudden, sharp, unmistakable. It rises in the body before the mind can form words, tightening the jaw, quickening the breath, sharpening the senses. It's the moment a boundary is crossed, a value is violated, or a line you thought was understood is ignored. Anger is the flare that says, something here matters, something here is not okay. Anger is the emotional signal that a boundary has been breached or a core value has been threatened. It is a protective response, a surge of energy designed to mobilize us toward change, clarity, or defense. Anger is not inherently destructive, it is directional. It points to what we care about, what we expect, and what we refuse to tolerate. At its core, anger is the body's way of saying, pay attention, something important is happening. Anger is the fire that reveals our devotion. It shows us where our heart is invested, where our expectations lift, where our dignity stands guard. It is the heat that rises when fairness fractures, when respect is withheld, when harm is done without acknowledgement. Anger sharpens our awareness. It clears the fog, focuses the mind, and brings our values into sharp relief. But anger also carries attention, the desire to protect without destroying, to speak truth without burning everything down. It is the emotion that asks us to hold both power and restraint, both clarity and compassion, both the right to feel and the responsibility to choose what comes next. Anger is not the enemy, it is the messenger. It tells us where we hurt, where we hope, and where we must draw the line with courage and care. Anger becomes wisdom when we listen to what it protects. It becomes clarity when we honor the boundary beneath it. It becomes strength when we channel it toward truth rather than retaliation. May we learn to meet our anger with curiosity, to follow its signal without letting it steer the whole story, and to recognize that beneath every flare of heat is something we value deeply, something worth understanding, defending, or healing. Contempt. Contempt arrives quietly, almost elegantly, a lift of the chin, a narrowing of the eyes, a subtle shift that creates distance without a word. It's the moment you feel yourself pulling back, rising above, separating from someone who has disappointed you, disrespected you, or violated a value you hold dear. Contempt doesn't flare like anger, it cools. It creates space, superiority, and emotional height. It's the feeling that says, I'm done engaging, I'm above this, I'm above you. Contempt is the emotional distancing that occurs when we judge someone as beneath us, morally, intellectually, or relationally. It is a protective emotion designed to create separation from what feels harmful, disappointing, or unworthy of continued investment. Contempt often emerges when anger hardens, when hurt calcifies, or when trust erodes beyond repair. At its core, contempt is the emotion that says, I no longer see you as equal, and I no longer expect anything from you. Contempt is the cold shield we raise when closeness feels too risky and disappointment feels too familiar. It is the emotional exit, the quiet withdrawal from connection, the turning away of the heart long before the body moves. Where anger wants to engage, contempt wants to detach. Where hurt longs to be understood, contempt stops asking. It is the emotion that creates emotional altitude, lifting us above the person or situation so we no longer feel vulnerable to it. But contempt carries a cost. It freezes what could have been repaired, silences what could have been spoken, and replaces curiosity with certainty. It is the emotion that protects us from further harm, but also from deeper connection. Contempt is the closing of a door, the quiet end of hope, the moment we decide that someone is no longer worth the effort of understanding. Contempt becomes wisdom when we recognize the boundary beneath it. It becomes clarity when we understand what we can no longer tolerate. But it becomes healing when we soften the certainty that freezes connection and allow ourselves to feel the hurt beneath the distance. May we learn to notice contempt not as a final judgment, but as a signal, a sign that something in us needs protection, honesty, or repair. For beneath every moment of contempt lies a story of disappointment, dignity, and the desire to feel respected again. Disgust. Disgust arrives as a recoil, quick, instinctive, unmistakable. It's the moment your body pulls back before your mind has time to explain why. A tightening in the stomach, a turning of the head, a subtle withdrawal from something that feels off, wrong, or out of alignment with your values. Disgust doesn't ask questions. It creates distance. It says, this is not for me. This does not belong here. Disgust is the visceral emotional response that pushes us away from what feels contaminated, physically, morally, or relationally. It is a protective reflex designed to keep us safe from what threatens our integrity, our well-being, or our sense of what is right. Disgust often emerges when someone's actions violate our deepest values, when behavior feels degrading, or when something crosses a line we didn't realize we had. At its core, disgust is the emotion that says, I need space from this. I cannot let this in. Disgust is the body's boundary, the instinctive no that rises before language. It is the emotional flinch that tells us something is out of alignment with who we are or what we believe. Where anger burns hot, disgust cools and withdraws. Where contempt elevates, disgust repels. It is the emotion that protects our inner world from what feels corrosive, degrading, or unsafe. But disgust also carries complexity. It can reveal our values, yet it can also harden into judgment if left unexamined. It can protect us from harm, yet it can also distance us from nuance, humanity, or understanding. Disgust is the instinct that says, step back, but it is also the invitation to ask, what value is being violated here? What part of me is trying to stay safe? It is the emotion that guards our dignity, our boundaries, and our sense of what is acceptable. Disgust becomes wisdom when we listen to the boundary beneath it. It becomes clarity when we understand what we cannot allow into our lives. And it becomes compassion when we recognize that the instinct to recoil is rooted in the desire to protect what is sacred within us. May we learn to honor disgust as a signal, not a verdict, and to let it guide us toward integrity without closing the door on our own humanity. For beneath every moment of disgust lies a value worth understanding, a boundary worth respecting, and a self-worth protecting. Dehumanization. Dehumanization arrives as a flattening, a quiet shift where a person stops feeling like a person and becomes an idea, an offense, a symbol of harm. It's the moment someone's complexity disappears, replaced by the single thing they did that hurt you. The warmth drains, the empathy thins, and the mind narrows its focus to the wound rather than the whole human being behind it. Dehumanization doesn't shout, it erases. It says, "You are no longer someone I need to understand." Dehumanization is the emotional process of reducing another person to less than human, stripping away their nuance, their history, their intentions, and their inherent dignity. It is a protective mechanism, often born from pain, betrayal, or threat, designed to create emotional distance from someone who feels unsafe or harmful. Dehumanization simplifies what is complex, turning a person into a category, a label, or a single story. At its core, dehumanization is the emotion that says, "It's easier to see you as an object than to feel the impact of what you've done." Dehumanization is the emotional shortcut we take when the full weight of someone's humanity feels too heavy to hold. It is the narrowing of vision, the shrinking of compassion, the instinct to protect ourselves by reducing the other to something smaller, simpler, and easier to reject. Where anger burns and contempt elevates, dehumanization erases. It removes the possibility of dialogue, repair, or understanding by removing the personhood of the one who hurt us. And yet, beneath this flattening lies a deeper truth. Dehumanization often emerges where pain has gone unacknowledged, where harm has not been repaired, where the cost of empathy feels too high. It is the emotional armor we wear when we fear that seeing someone fully might reopen a wound we're not ready to face. But dehumanization also carries a quiet danger. It can protect us in the moment, yet disconnect us from our own humanity if we stay there too long. It is the emotion that asks us to choose between safety and complexity, between distance and truth, between the simplicity of judgment and the challenge of seeing the whole picture. Dehumanization becomes insight when we recognize the pain beneath it. It becomes clarity when we understand what feels too threatening to face, and it becomes healing when we gently widen our view, allowing nuance to return without dismissing the harm that was done. May we learn to notice dehumanization not as a failure of compassion, but as a signal, a sign that something in us needs protection, acknowledgement, or repair. For beneath every moment of dehumanization lies a story of hurt, dignity, and the longing to feel safe again. Hate. Hate arrives with force, heavy, consuming, unmistakable. It's the moment something inside you hardens, when the hurt runs so deep, or the injustice feels so severe that your whole body braces against the source of the pain. Hate doesn't flicker like anger or cool like contempt. It surges. It is the emotional storm that says, "This is dangerous, this is intolerable, this must be pushed far away." Hate is the intense emotional response that seeks to reject, eliminate, or distance ourselves from what feels profoundly harmful or unjust. It is a protective force, born from deep injury, betrayal, fear, or moral outrage. Hate simplifies complexity, turning a person or situation into a singular threat, something to oppose, avoid, or eradicate emotionally. At its core, hate is the emotion that says, "This has hurt me so deeply that I cannot allow it near me again." Hate is the fire that burns when the wound is too deep for anger alone. It is the emotional armor forged in the aftermath of harm, the instinct to fortify, to distance, to ensure the pain cannot repeat itself. Where anger wants change and contempt wants distance, hate wants separation so complete that the source of harm loses all power. It is the emotion that rises when trust has been shattered, when dignity has been violated, when the cost of empathy feels unbearable. Hate narrows the world into sharp lines, safe and unsafe, right and wrong, us and them. It gives us the illusion of control in moments when we feel powerless, the illusion of strength when we feel broken, the illusion of certainty when everything inside us feels threatened. But hate also carries a weight. It binds us to the very thing we want to escape, tethering us to the wound even as we try to push it away. It is the emotion that protects us fiercely, yet can consume us quietly if we never examine the pain beneath its flame. Hate becomes insight when we recognize the injury beneath it. It becomes clarity when we understand what feels profoundly unsafe or unjust. And it becomes healing when we allow ourselves to feel the grief, the fear, or the betrayal that hate has been shielding us from. May we learn to meet hate with honesty, not to justify it, but to understand the wound it guards. For beneath every moment of hate lies a story of harm, dignity, and the longing to feel safe, respected, and whole again. Self-righteousness. Self-righteousness arrives with a lift, a tightening in the spine, a certainty in the chest, a sense of standing on higher ground. It's the moment you feel absolutely sure you're right, that your perspective is the only reasonable one, that your moral position is unquestionable. It doesn't shout, it solidifies. It creates a sense of clarity so sharp that doubt, nuance, and humility fall away. Self-righteousness is the feeling that says, I see the truth clearly, and anyone who disagrees must be wrong. Self-righteousness is the emotional conviction that our beliefs, actions, or values are morally superior to someone else's. It is a protective stance, often emerging when our identity, ethics, or worldview feel threatened. Self-righteousness simplifies complexity, turning disagreements into moral failures and reducing others to the uninformed, the misguided, or the wrong. At its core, self-righteousness is the emotion that says, my certainty keeps me safe, and questioning it feels dangerous. Self-righteousness is the armor we wear when uncertainty feels too vulnerable. It is the emotional fortress built from conviction, designed to shield us from the discomfort of being wrong, misunderstood, or challenged. Where anger burns and contempt distances, self-righteousness elevates, placing us above the conflict, above the complexity, above the messy humanity of disagreement. It offers the illusion of clarity in moments when the truth is layered, nuanced, or incomplete. It gives us a sense of control when the world feels unpredictable, a sense of moral grounding when our values feel shaken. But self-righteousness also narrows our vision. It closes the door on curiosity, silences the possibility of learning, and turns connection into competition. It is the emotion that protects our identity, yet can isolate us from the very relationships that help us grow. Self-righteousness is the certainty that feels like strength, but often hides the fear of being vulnerable, wrong, or exposed. Self-righteousness becomes wisdom when we recognize the insecurity beneath it. It becomes clarity when we understand what value we're trying to defend. And it becomes growth when we soften our certainty just enough to let humility return. May we learn to meet self-righteousness with curiosity, not to shame ourselves for feeling it, but to understand the fear, the conviction, or the longing for integrity that lives beneath its surface. For beneath every moment of self-righteousness lies a desire to feel grounded, respected, and aligned with what we believe is right. A desire that becomes more powerful when paired with openness and compassion. When we feel wronged, our emotions become signals of what matters most. Anger shows us where our boundaries lie. Contempt reveals where respect has fractured. Disgust highlights what feels morally misaligned. Dehumanization exposes the places where pain eclipses empathy. Hate reflects the depth of our hurt and the intensity of our need for justice. And self-righteousness reminds us how easily certainty can harden into distance. Together, these emotions show that navigating harm is both instinct and invitation. a balance of protecting ourselves and examining the stories we build around our pain. They remind us that our inner world is shaped not only by what others do, but by how we choose to respond to the moments that wound us. As this cluster closes, may we carry forward the strength to honor our boundaries with clarity, to seek justice without losing compassion, and to recognize the humanity that remains even in conflict. For it is in the moments when we feel wronged that our integrity is tested and our hearts learn the difficult art of holding both truth and responsibility.